Promise I'll save you and you become our dad, the girls said to the millionaire. But moments later, something terrible happened. Comment saying what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and comment what city you're watching me from. I really want to know if you liked my story, and I want to get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The biting cold of the November morning in Millfield, Pennsylvania, made little Isabel and Victoria shiver under the ragged coats that barely covered their thin bodies. At 4 years old, the twins walked among the tombstones of the municipal cemetery with uncertain steps, their large, frightened eyes searching for fallen flowers on the damp ground. It was a ritual they had repeated for 3 weeks, ever since they discovered where their mother, Clara, had been buried. Isabel held her sister's hand tightly, guiding her through the narrow paths between the graves. Her partial hearing loss forced her to pay even more visual attention to the dangers around them, but it also partially shielded her from the noises that terrified Victoria. The smaller of the two would startle at every strange sound, her fingers squeezing her sister's tightly whenever she heard distant sirens or raised voices. "Izzy, did you find pretty flowers for Mommy?" whispered Victoria, her voice hoarse from hunger and cold. Isabel pointed to some yellowed daisies that had fallen from a nearby arrangement. They bent down together, carefully collecting each petal as if they were precious treasures. It was all they could offer the mother who had passed away 3 months ago, taking with her the babies she was carrying and leaving them completely alone in the world, life on. The streets had begun 2 weeks after the funeral, when their godmother Connie discovered the astronomical debts Clara had left behind. "I can't afford 2 extra mouths to feed," the woman had shouted, pushing the girls out of the house with only a bag of old clothes and some crumpled documents. Since then, they had slept in stairwells, begged for food at bakery doors, and found their only safe refuge in the cemetery. It was the closest place they had to their mother, and somehow they felt protected there among the dead, far from the cruelty of the living. As they walked toward Clara's simple grave, marked only by a wooden cross with her name hand-painted on it, Victoria stopped abruptly. Her eyes widened with fear and confusion. "Izzy, there's a man over there," she murmured, pointing to a white marble tombstone a few yards ahead. Isabel followed her sister's gaze and saw a male figure leaning against the tomb, motionless. The man was tied up and gagged, his eyes closed, his dark suit dirty with soil and dried blood. He seemed to be unconscious, but was breathing with difficulty. The girls approached slowly, their self-preservation instinct battling a childlike curiosity mixed with compassion. They had seen a lot of violence back when they still lived with their mother and her aggressive boyfriend. But something about this man sparked a strange familiarity in them. "He's hurt like Mommy used to be," whispered Victoria, remembering the times Clara would appear with bruises and cuts after fights. Damien Cross, the 52-year-old owner of the largest furniture factory in the region, slowly woke up to the sound of children's voices. He had spent the entire night tied up there, kidnapped by 3 ex-employees he had fired after a ruthless company restructuring. The men had argued about his fate for hours before temporarily abandoning him, promising to come back to finish the job. When he opened his eyes, he found 2 dirty, worried faces watching him. The girls had tangled brown hair, clothes that were once colorful but now faded and torn, and a thinness that revealed weeks of deprivation. Isabel was the first to act. She picked up a sharp stone from the ground and began to carefully cut the ropes binding the man's wrists, her small hands trembling with nervousness and determination. "Promise," she whispered with difficulty, her words coming out imperfectly, due to her hearing impairment. "I save you, and you become our dad." The sentence struck Damien like a bolt of lightning. These two abandoned children were willing to save him in exchange for fatherly protection, something he had never offered to anyone. A lonely and bitter businessman, since the end of his marriage 5 years earlier, he had built emotional walls that seemed insurmountable. But something in their desperate innocence awakened a long-dormant protective instinct. When he finally managed to free himself completely from the ropes with the girl's help, Damien staggered to his feet, his legs numb from the long immobilization. He looked around for signs of the kidnappers, but the cemetery was silent, except for the wind rustling the trees. "You two, are you alone here?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "We live here near Mommy," Victoria replied, pointing to the wooden cross. "She went away, and Aunt Connie didn't want us anymore." Damien looked at the simple cross and felt a tightness in his chest he hadn't experienced in years. 2 orphan children living on the streets, taking care of him when any adult would have fled. The irony was cruel. A man who had fired dozens of employees without a second thought was being saved by 2 indirect victims of his corporate coldness. The sound of approaching engines made all 3 of them tense up. Damien instinctively grabbed the girl's hands. "They're coming back." The sound of the engines grew louder, echoing among the tombstones like a dark omen. Damien felt panic seize his still-aching body, but the presence of the 2 girls beside him awakened a protective instinct he never knew he had. "Quick, this way!" he whispered, pulling Isabel and Victoria toward a denser area of the cemetery where old trees offered better cover. Victoria began to tremble violently as she heard the noise of the approaching vehicles. The sound immediately transported her to the nights of terror at home, when her mother's boyfriend would arrive drunk, and police sirens would eventually cut through the dawn after neighbors reported the domestic violence. "No, no, no," she murmured, her small hands covering her ears in a desperate attempt to block the traumatic memories. Isabel, noticing her sister's state through her sharp peripheral vision, hugged her tightly as they hid behind a stone mausoleum. Even with her limited hearing, she could feel the vibrations in the ground caused by the approaching vehicles. Damien watched the girls with growing concern. He recognized those signs of deep trauma. He had seen female employees at his factory exhibit similar behaviors when facing extreme stress. But seeing 2 such young children carrying such emotional scars awakened in him an anger he hadn't felt in a long time. 3 men got out of an old rusty pickup truck, walking directly to the spot where Damien had been tied up. They were Roger, Dennis, and Marcus, all former employees from the production sector whom he had fired 6 months ago during a restructuring that prioritized automated machines over human labor. "Where the hell did he go?" shouted Roger, the tallest of the group, furiously kicking the cut ropes on the ground. "Someone untied him." "Impossible," replied Dennis, a short, nervous man who had worked at the company for 15 years before being laid off. "Who'd be crazy enough to come into the cemetery at dawn?" Marcus, the youngest of the 3, examined the ropes closely. "Look here, they were cut with something sharp, and look at these small footprints in the dirt." Damien held his breath when he saw Marcus pointing to the marks left by the girls' bare feet. The man was getting dangerously close to where they were hiding. "There are child's footprints," Marcus murmured, frowning. 2 children, by the different sizes of the marks. "What difference does it make?" Roger exploded, his frustration boiling over. "The important thing is the bastard escaped. Now he's going straight to the police and we're all going to jail." "Calm down, Roger," Dennis tried to soothe him. "He can't prove anything. It was 3 hooded people who kidnapped him, remember? He never saw our faces clearly." Victoria, still in a panic, began to hyperventilate. The muffled sound of her gasping breath echoed faintly among the stones, making Damien close his eyes in desperation. If the men heard... Isabel, sensing the danger, gently placed her hand over her sister's mouth. not to cruelly silence her, but to remind her of the game they used to play when they needed to hide from the violent boyfriend. "Statue," she whispered, almost inaudibly. The game worked. Victoria forced herself to control her breathing, closing her eyes and imagining she was a stone statue, motionless and silent like those that decorated some of the surrounding tombs. "Let's search the area," Marcus decided. "If he's injured, he can't have gone far." The three men split up, each exploring a different direction of the cemetery. Damien knew it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. He needed to make a quick decision. With careful gestures, he indicated for the girls to follow him. He knew of a secondary exit from the cemetery that led to a less busy residential street. If they could get there without being seen. They moved slowly between the graves, Damien carrying Victoria in his arms to muffle the sound of her steps, while Isabel followed beside him, her eyes alert to any suspicious movement. The girl had developed an impressive ability to detect danger visually, compensating for her auditory limitation. When they were just a few yards from the exit, Dennis suddenly appeared between two trees, blocking their path. The man stared at them for a few seconds, processing the unlikely scene before him, his ex-boss fleeing with two street children. "Roger, Marcus," he shouted. "I found him!" Damien didn't hesitate. He put Victoria on the ground and pushed both girls toward the gate. "Run! Get out of here!" But the girls didn't move. Instead, Isabel picked up a rock from the ground and threw it with all her strength at Dennis, hitting him in the shoulder. Victoria, despite her state of panic, kicked the man's shin with her bare, dirty feet. "Nobody hurts our dad," she yelled, with a ferocity that surprised even Damien. Dennis, unbalanced by the children's unexpected attack, stumbled and fell heavily on a low gravestone. The impact left him temporarily stunned, long enough for Damien and the girls to escape through the gate. They ran through the empty morning streets, Damien carrying one girl, and then the other when their small legs could no longer keep up. Only when they reached a busy square where people were beginning their morning activities did he allow himself to stop. He sat heavily on a bench, the girls collapsing beside him, exhausted and scared. It was then that the reality of the situation hit him completely. He was officially on the run with two street children who had saved him from a kidnapping. He had no idea of their full names, their history, or how he would explain their presence to the authorities. "What are your names?" he finally asked. "Isabel Santos," the girl replied, her careful pronunciation revealing the effort she made to be understood. "And she's Victoria Santos." "Santos," Damien murmured, the last name echoing familiarly in his mind. Where had he heard that name before? "And you?" asked Victoria, her large eyes still wet with tears. "What's your name, Dad?" The word "dad" hit him again with devastating force. In his previous marriage, he and his ex-wife had tried to have children for years without success. The failure to start a family had been one of the factors that contributed to the end of their relationship. "Damien," he replied softly. "Damien Cross." Isabel tilted her head, studying his face intently. "I've heard that name before." Before they could explore that observation, Damien realized they needed to get out of there. The kidnappers could be looking for him, and two dirty, ragged children by his side would attract unwanted attention. "Do you have anywhere to stay?" he asked. "We sleep wherever we can," Victoria replied with devastating simplicity. Yesterday was under the bridge, the day before was in the church. The decision formed in Damien's mind without him consciously realizing it. Maybe it was gratitude, guilt, or a long-suppressed paternal impulse, but he knew he couldn't abandon these two girls. "Come with me," he said, getting up from the bench. "We're going to my house." Damien's mansion in the Chestnut Hill neighborhood stood imposing against the gray November sky. its 3 stories and well-kept gardens contrasting dramatically with the reality of the 2 girls walking timidly beside him. Isabel and Victoria had never seen such a large house, and the intimidation was visible on their dirty, tired faces. "Is this where you live?" whispered Victoria, her wide eyes scanning the stone facade and stained-glass windows. "It's bigger than the church," observed Isabel, her voice filled with awe. Damien stopped in front of the electronic gate, suddenly aware of the stark contrast between his world of privilege and the brutal reality these children had faced. When the gate opened automatically, both girls got scared and clung to his legs. "It's just an automatic gate," he explained gently, realizing how any sudden sound or movement put them on high alert. "It won't hurt you." Mrs. Gable, the 58-year-old housekeeper who had worked for Damien for 15 years, appeared at the main door with an expression of absolute shock. She knew her boss's solitary habits well and had never seen him accompanied by children, especially children in such a deplorable state. "Mr. Cross," she exclaimed, quickly coming down the entrance stairs. "Where have you been? They were calling all night, saying you missed yesterday's meeting." "I'll explain later, Mrs. Gable," he replied, protectively placing his hands on the girl's shoulders. "These are Isabel and Victoria. They'll be staying with us for a while." The housekeeper looked at the 2 children with a mixture of compassion and practical concern. Their hair was so tangled it would need to be cut completely. Their clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, and their extreme thinness was alarming. "My goodness," she murmured, kneeling to the girl's level. "When was the last time you ate something?" Isabel and Victoria looked at each other, trying to remember. The last few days had been a blur of hunger, cold, and fear. "Yesterday we found bread in the bakery's trash," Victoria said honestly. The answer made Mrs. Gable place a hand over her heart, while Damien felt a deep guilt settle in his chest. How could someone who had so much be so oblivious to the suffering happening just a few miles from his home? "Come on, girls," the housekeeper said, extending her calloused hands. "Let's get you a warm bath and a real meal." But when Mrs. Gable tried to separate them from Damien to take them for their bath, Victoria panicked. "No, don't separate us from Dad," she cried, clinging desperately to his leg. "He promised he would be our dad," Isabel explained, her voice trembling with the fear of being abandoned again. Damien knelt, getting to their level. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, his voice softer than he had ever used. "Mrs. Gable just wants to help you get clean and fed. I'll be right here when you get out of the bath." "Do you really promise?" Victoria insisted, her eyes searching for any sign of a lie. "I promise." The process of bathing the girls revealed the full extent of their suffering. Mrs. Gable discovered multiple small scars on their arms and legs, evidence of minor accidents and injuries that had never received proper treatment. The dirt was so ingrained that it took 3 consecutive baths to remove it completely. Meanwhile, Damien paced nervously in the living room, battling thoughts that tormented him. The girls had said their last name was Santos, Clara Santos. The name echoed in his mind with a disturbing familiarity, but he couldn't place the specific memory. He decided to call his secretary at the company. "Sandra, I need you to check our files of fired employees from the last few years. Look for someone named Clara Santos." "Certainly, Mr. Cross. May I ask why?" "Just do it. And Sandra, cancel all my appointments for the next few days." When the girls finally came out of the bath, wearing robes that Mrs. Gable had improvised by cutting up old towels, they looked like 2 completely different children. Their hair, now clean and simply cut by the housekeeper, revealed a golden brown color that shone in the light. Their faces, free of dirt, showed delicate features and expressive eyes that carried too much sadness for their age. "You look beautiful," Damien said sincerely, feeling a strange emotion as he saw them transformed. Mrs. Gable had prepared a full meal: vegetable soup, fresh bread, fruit, and warm milk. The girls ate with a desperate hunger, but also with care, as if afraid the food might disappear at any moment. Slowly, "Girls," the housekeeper guided gently, "there's enough food for everyone." After the meal, Damien took them to what would temporarily be their room, one of the guest rooms on the second floor, with 2 single beds and a view of the garden. It was bigger than any place they had slept in recent months. "Is it really ours?" asked Victoria, timidly touching the soft mattress. "For now it is," replied Damien. It was then that he noticed how Isabel always positioned herself to have Victoria in her line of sight, compensating for her hearing difficulty with constant visual vigilance, and how Victoria startled at any sudden noise, even the most harmless ones. "Isabel," he said gently, "do you have trouble hearing?" The girl nodded in embarrassment. "Sometimes people talk and I don't hear them right." "And you, Victoria, do loud noises scare you?" "When there's a loud noise, I remember Ron yelling at Mommy," she explained, her eyes filling with tears. "He would hit her when he drank." Damien felt a deep anger toward this man who had traumatized 2 innocent children. "Ron can't hurt anyone anymore," he said firmly. "You're safe here." That night, when he thought the girls had finally fallen asleep in real beds for the first time in months, he heard a whispered conversation coming from their room. "Izzy, do you think he's going to send us away tomorrow?" asked Victoria. "I don't know," replied Isabel. "But if he does, we'll go back to the cemetery near Mommy. I like him. He has kind eyes like Mommy used to have." "I like him too, but we can't get too attached, remember? Everyone always leaves." The children's words broke Damien's heart. They had learned not to expect permanence, to protect themselves emotionally against inevitable abandonment. It was a cruel wisdom for 4-year-old children. The next morning, Sandra called with the requested information. "Mr. Cross, I found the file for Clara Santos. She worked as a night cleaner at our company 6 years ago, from January to July. She was fired for suspicion of theft of office supplies." Damien froze. "Suspicion of theft?" "Yes, sir. According to the report, company items were found in her bag during a routine search. The dismissal was authorized by you." The memory returned like an avalanche. Clara Santos, a young pregnant woman who had begged for a second chance, swearing she hadn't stolen anything. He had refused to listen to her, ordering her immediate dismissal without further investigation. Now, 6 years later, that woman's daughters had saved his life. The irony was devastating, but even more devastating was realizing that his own merciless decisions had contributed to the suffering of these children. If he had given Clara a second chance, if he had investigated properly. The phone rang again, interrupting his tortured thoughts. It was an unknown number. "Damien Cross?" said a male voice he didn't recognize. "Who's asking?" "Someone who knows where you spent last night. And who knows about the 2 little witnesses you're hiding." The voice on the line made Damien's blood run cold. He instinctively moved away from the stairs, fearing the girls might hear the conversation. "What do you want?" he asked in a low voice, trying to remain calm. "I want you to forget what happened last night. Forget the faces, forget the voices, forget everything. And most importantly, keep those 2 brats quiet." "Who are you?" Damien insisted, though he already suspected the answer. "Someone who knows you have a lot to lose if this story gets out. Your reputation, your company, your freedom. Think carefully, Damien. Is it worth risking everything for 2 street kids?" The call ended abruptly, leaving Damien with the phone trembling in his hands. The kidnappers not only knew where he lived, but they also knew about the girl's presence. This meant they were being watched. He hurried up the stairs and found Isabel and Victoria playing quietly on the floor of their room, using some old dolls that Mrs. Gable had found in the attic. The domestic scene contrasted brutally with the threat hanging over them. "Girls," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "we need to talk about some safety rules." Both looked up, Isabel with her attentive expression and Victoria with the fear that always shone in her eyes when adults spoke in a serious tone. "You can't leave the house alone, not to the garden, not to the street. And if a stranger calls or shows up here, you need to tell me immediately." "Why?" asked Victoria. "Are the bad men coming back?" Damien knelt before them, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes bad people get angry when they don't get what they want, but I promise I will protect you, like Mommy promised that Ron wouldn't hit her anymore," murmured Isabel, her observation as sharp as a blade. The comparison hit Damien deeply. Clara had made empty promises, unable to protect her daughters from domestic violence. How could he ensure he would be different? "I'm going to hire security," he decided out loud. "People who will watch over the house." That afternoon, while the girls napped, exhausted from the emotional tension of the past few days, Damien received an unexpected visit. Joshua Cross, his younger brother, appeared at the main gate with an appearance that betrayed months of hard living. Damien hadn't seen Joshua in 2 years, ever since his brother had disappeared, claiming he needed time to sort out personal problems. Now he was here, too thin, with worn clothes and a nervous gaze that couldn't settle on anything. "Joshua?" Damien opened the gate personally, bypassing the intercom. "Where did you come from?" "Brother, I need to talk to you," Joshua said, avoiding hugs or physical contact. "It's about the company, and about other things." They went to the office on the first floor, a room Joshua knew well from his time as a minority partner in the factory. The younger brother observed the changes in decor, the new furniture, the evident prosperity that contrasted with his own situation. "I heard you had some problems recently," Joshua said, sitting nervously in the leather armchair. "What kind of problems?" Damien kept his tone neutral, but internally he was on alert. "Disgruntled employees, people you fired who still hold a grudge." Joshua paused, studying his brother's reaction. "I also heard you're taking care of some orphan kids." How could Joshua know about the girls? Damien felt a chill run down his spine. "Where have you been these 2 years, Joshua?" "Around, trying to get myself together." Joshua got up and walked to the window. "I had a gambling problem, you know, racked up some debts, but I'm clean now." "And what does that have to do with me?" "I need to come back to the company. I need my old position as a partner." Joshua's voice took on a desperate tone. "I have bills to pay, commitments I can't put off any longer." Damien watched his brother with growing suspicion. Joshua had always been irresponsible with money, but there was something more to this visit. The way he avoided eye contact, the way his hands trembled slightly. "I can't put you back in the company right now," Damien said. "Not under the current circumstances." "What circumstances?" Joshua turned abruptly. "Oh, you're talking about those kids you've adopted? 2 little street girls?" Damien's heart raced. "How do you know about them?" "Millfield is a small town, brother. People talk." Joshua smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Especially when a rich businessman suddenly appears with 2 undocumented orphans. At that moment, small footsteps echoed in the hallway. Isabel appeared at the office door, her sleepy eyes looking for Damien. "Dad, Victoria had a nightmare," she said, simply. Joshua watched the girl with a disturbing intensity. "This must be one of them," he commented. "She looks malnourished. How long have they been living here?" "Joshua, please leave," Damien said firmly, standing up and positioning himself between his brother and Isabel. Such hostility, brother. I'm just trying to understand how two street kids managed to find you at the exact moment you were in trouble. The observation made Damien freeze. How did Joshua know about the kidnapping? It's quite a coincidence, Joshua continued, his voice taking on a malicious tone. Two fired employees decide to kidnap you, and just then, two orphan daughters of a former employee show up to save you. Former employee? Damien felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Clara Santos. You remember her, don't you? That cleaner you fired for theft 6 years ago. Joshua smiled again. Well, these are her daughters. Isabel, who had been watching the conversation in silence, suddenly perked up. You knew our mom? Joshua knelt to the girl's level, his expression taking on a false kindness. I did, little one, and I can tell you many stories about her. Joshua, get out of my house. Now. Damien's voice was filled with an authority that brooked no argument. All right, Joshua said, raising his hands in surrender. But think about what we discussed, about my return to the company, and about how complicated it is to take care of children when you have so many enemies. After Joshua left, Damien went up to the girls' room. He found Victoria awake, hugging Isabel, both clearly shaken by the nightmare and the tense conversation they had witnessed. Who was that man? Asked Victoria. My brother, Damien replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. He didn't like us, Isabel observed with her sharp perception. Don't worry about him. He won't bother you anymore. But even as he offered comfort to the girls, Damien couldn't shake the feeling that Joshua knew much more about the whole situation than he had admitted. And the way his brother had looked at the children, there was something predatory in that gaze that left him deeply unsettled. That night, after the girls had finally fallen asleep, Damien called a private investigator he had used for business matters before. I need you to investigate someone for me, he said. My brother, Joshua Cross. I want to know exactly where he's been for the past 2 years. Any specific reason? Damien looked toward the staircase leading to the girls' room. Let's just say some inconsistencies have emerged in his version of events. As he hung up the phone, a terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. What if Joshua's reappearance wasn't a coincidence? What if he knew about the kidnapping because... The phone rang again, interrupting his dark thoughts. It was the same unknown number from before. I hope you've thought carefully about our previous conversation, the familiar voice said. What do you want from me? For now, just silence. But if you keep asking inconvenient questions, we might need to broaden our negotiation. 3 weeks had passed since Isabel and Victoria arrived at Damien's mansion, and a delicate routine had begun to form. The girls would wake up before dawn, still bound by the habit of constant vigilance developed during their months on the streets. But now they found comfort in the familiar sounds of the house. Mrs. Gable preparing coffee, the newspaper being delivered to the gate, the birds singing in the garden. Damien had hired 2 discreet security guards who took turns protecting the property. But the threatening phone calls had stopped abruptly after Joshua's visit. This pause in tension, however, brought no relief, only a growing sense that something bigger was being planned. Dr. Richard Miles, a private pediatrician Damien had hired, made weekly visits to monitor the girl's physical and emotional recovery. During his 4th consultation, he brought news that changed everyone's perspective on Isabel's condition. Her hearing loss is not congenital, the doctor explained, putting away his instruments after a detailed examination. It was caused by repeated physical trauma, blows to the head area probably. Damien felt a cold fury settle in his chest. Physical trauma? Yes. The good news is that some of her hearing can be recovered with surgery and proper therapy. She's young, her auditory system still has regenerative potential. Isabel, who was sitting quietly in the chair next to him, looked at the doctor with cautious hope. You mean I'll be able to hear like everyone else? With the right treatment, yes, it will take time and dedication, but it's possible. Victoria, who was holding her sister's hand tightly, smiled for the first time since they had arrived at the house. Izzy is going to get better. But the joy was cut short when Dr. Miles asked to speak with Damien privately. In the hallway, away from the girl's ears, the doctor revealed more disturbing findings. I found evidence of severe neglect, chronic malnutrition, multiple old, poorly healed fractures, signs that they were subjected to extreme stress for prolonged periods. The doctor paused, choosing his words carefully. Mr. Cross, these children survived conditions that would kill many adults. Their mother? The mother was likely a victim too. From what I observe, someone exercised violent control over the entire family. That afternoon, while the girls played in the garden under Mrs. Gable's supervision, Damien received the private investigator's report on Joshua. The information was devastating. Joshua hadn't been in treatment for a gambling addiction. He had served 2 years in prison for fraud and racketeering, having been released only 3 weeks ago. Even more alarming, during his time in prison, he had shared a cell with Roger Santos, one of the men who had participated in the kidnapping. Roger Santos, the same last name as Clara and the girls. Damien immediately called Sandra, his secretary, requesting a deeper investigation into the fired employees. I want to know about any family connection between the fired employees and other current or past employees. The answer came 2 hours later, bringing revelations that made the pieces of the puzzle begin to fit together in a terrifying way. Mr. Cross, I found something important. Roger Santos, fired 6 months ago, is the brother of Clara Santos, fired 6 years ago for theft. The phone nearly slipped from Damien's hands. Roger was the girl's uncle. The kidnapping hadn't just been about money or revenge. There was something personal, familial, involved. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Damien found himself studying old company photographs that Sandra had sent. In one of them, taken during a holiday party 6 years ago, he managed to identify Clara, a young, beautiful woman, visibly pregnant, smiling shyly at the camera. Next to her, with his arm possessively around her waist, was Joshua. The photo fell from his trembling hands. Joshua knew Clara intimately. He was at the company at the time of her dismissal. He had disappeared shortly after the problem with the theft. The phone rang, making him jump. This time, it wasn't an unknown number, it was Joshua. "Brother, I think we need to talk in person," said the younger. Brother's voice, taking on a tone Damien had never heard before, cold, calculating. About what? About Clara? About the girls? About certain truths you need to know before you get too attached to them. What truths? Truths about fatherhood. About who their real father is. Damien felt the world spin around him. What are you talking about? Meet me tomorrow at the factory office after hours. And Damien, come alone. It would be a shame if something happened to the girls while you're not home to protect them. The veiled threat made Damien's blood boil. If you touch them, I won't touch anything, as long as you show up for our little chat. The next morning, Damien hired 2 additional security guards to stay specifically with the girls, instructing Mrs. Gable not to let them leave their room for any reason. He invented an excuse about men fixing the electric fence to justify the temporary confinement. The girls, however, sensed the tension. Isabel, with her sharp ability to read facial expressions, approached him before his departure. "Dad, you're scared," she observed directly. The simplicity of the statement disarmed him. "A little," he admitted. "Is it because of us?" Damien knelt to her level. "You've done nothing wrong, ever. Some adults make bad decisions, but you will always be innocent." "If you don't come back," Isabel said with frightening maturity, "we'll be okay. We always are." The resignation in the girl's voice broke Damien's heart. She had learned to prepare for abandonment, to protect herself emotionally. It was a defense no 4-year-old should ever have to develop. "I will come back," he promised. "I will always come back for you." The factory office at night had a gloomy atmosphere that Damien had never noticed before. The silent machines looked like metal skeletons in the twilight, and his footsteps echoed strangely on the concrete floor. Joshua was waiting in the conference room, sitting calmly at the table where so many business decisions had been made over the years. Next to him, a folder of documents and some scattered photographs. "Punctual as always," Joshua said, gesturing for Damien to sit. "Let's get straight to the point. What do you want?" Joshua pushed one of the photographs across the table. It was Isabel and Victoria's birth certificate. In the father field, it said Joshua Cross. "Surprised?" asked Joshua, watching his brother's shocked reaction. "This is impossible." "It's entirely possible. Clara and I were in a relationship for almost 2 years. She worked here. I was a partner in the company. It was natural that we got close." Damien studied the document, looking for signs of forgery. It seemed genuine. "If they are your daughters," he said slowly, "why did you abandon them on the streets?" "Because Clara betrayed me." Joshua's voice hardened. "She stole company documents, tried to blackmail me. When I fired her for theft, she said she was going to report me to you, tell you about our relationship, use the children to destroy me. And then I did what I had to do. I made her understand it would be better for everyone if she just disappeared." Damien's blood ran cold. "What did you do to her?" Joshua smiled, a smile that had nothing human in it. "The right question is, what are you willing to do to keep the girls safe?" The silence in the conference room was deafening. Damien watched his brother's sinister smile, trying to process the devastating implications of what he had just heard. If Joshua was really the girl's father, if he had done something terrible to Clara. "You're lying," Damien finally said, his voice hoarse with tension. "Am I?" Joshua pushed more documents across the table. "Here are photos of our relationship, proof that I financially supported Clara during her pregnancy, even prenatal exam records with my name as the accompanying person." Damien examined the documents with growing horror. Everything seemed legitimate. Photographs of Joshua and Clara together, she visibly pregnant, smiling. Receipts from medical appointments, purchases of baby supplies. "If you are their father," Damien said slowly, "why didn't you take responsibility when she passed away?" "Because Clara betrayed me in the worst, impossible way." Joshua stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the factory courtyard. "She found out about some financial irregularities I was committing in the company, small embezzlements, nothing significant, but she threatened to expose me to you, and so you fired her for theft. I planted some office supplies in her bag and arranged a surprise search. It was all too easy." Joshua laughed bitterly. "But Clara was smarter than I thought. Before she was fired, she photocopied incriminating documents and hid them." Damien felt nausea growing in his stomach. "Are you telling me you destroyed a pregnant woman's life to protect your own crimes?" "I'm telling you I did what any smart man would do. I protected my interests." "And the girls? Your own daughters?" Joshua's expression hardened. "Clara used them as weapons against me. She said she would raise them to hate me, that one day they would find out the truth about me, so I made a pragmatic decision." "What decision?" "I made it very clear to her that it would be better if she just disappeared, with the children, far away from Millfield, and she obeyed. Initially, yes, she moved to a small town in the countryside, took the girls. For a few years, I heard nothing from them." Joshua turned back to Damien. "But then she got sick. complications from the birth of the twins she was expecting. She started struggling, had no money for medical treatment. And you didn't help. Why would I? She had made her choice. Joshua sat down again. But then she did something unexpected. She came back to Millfield with the girls. She looked for me. Damien's heart pounded. When? 4 months ago. She showed up at the factory, thin, sick, with 2 malnourished children. Said she needed medical help, money to treat the complications from the birth. And you? I wasn't here. I was serving my sentence. Joshua paused, savoring the moment. But she left a message with an employee. Said she would be back. And did she come back? Yes, 3 weeks before I got out of prison. But this time, she didn't come alone. Joshua smiled that cold smile again. She brought Roger, her brother, my old cellmate. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in Damien's mind with terrifying clarity. Roger told her where you were, exactly, and together they cooked up a rather creative revenge plan. What plan? To kidnap you, the rich, powerful brother who never bothered to check if his business decisions were ruining families. Joshua leaned forward. Clara wanted you to know what it was like to lose everything, to be vulnerable, powerless. Damien felt as if he had been punched in the gut. The girls, did they know? Of course not. Clara may have been many things, but she loved those children. She left them in a safe place before carrying out the plan. Safe where? In the cemetery where she used to take the girls, to visit the grave of the twins who didn't survive. It was the only place in Millfield where they felt connected to their family. The cruel irony of the situation hit Damien like a wave. So when they found me, it was pure coincidence. The plan was to keep you kidnapped for a few days, scare you, maybe hurt you a little. But it was never to kill you. Joshua paused. That changed when Clara died. How did she die? The question came out in a whisper. Untreated medical complications. The problems from the birth finally caught up with her. Joshua spoke as if he were commenting on the weather. She died in a public clinic 3 days after the kidnapping. Roger was distraught. He wanted to make the revenge more permanent. And you allowed it? I was in prison, brother. I couldn't allow or prevent anything. Joshua stood up again. But now I'm here, and I can choose what to do with my daughters. Damien felt a deep fury take over every cell in his body. They are not your daughters. You abandoned them. Biologically they are, legally they are, and now that I know where they are... Joshua walked to the door, then turned. I'm coming for them tomorrow. I won't let you. You won't have a choice, unless... Joshua pretended to consider an alternative. Unless I'm reinstated as the majority partner of the company, with 60% of the shares. You're insane. I'm pragmatic. In exchange for the company, you can keep the girls. You can even adopt them legally. I'll sign the custody transfer papers. Joshua smiled. It's a fair deal. And if I refuse, then you'll find out what it's like to lose everything you care about. The girls will come with me, and I guarantee you'll never see them again. Joshua opened the door. You have 24 hours to decide. After Joshua left, Damien remained in the empty room, trying to process what had happened. His entire life had become a complex web of lies, blackmail, and manipulation. And at the center of this web were 2 innocent children who had suffered more than any human being should. He picked up his phone and called Dr. Miles. Doctor, I need an urgent favor. Can I request DNA tests for the girls? Of course, but may I ask why? Issues of paternity have arisen that need to be clarified. I understand. I can collect the samples tomorrow morning. When Damien arrived home, it was almost midnight. He found the girls awake in their room, hugging each other, clearly worried about his delay. Dad! Victoria ran to hug him. We thought you weren't coming back." "I promised I would come back," he said, hugging them both, "and I always keep my promises." Isabel studied him with her sharp perception. "Did someone hurt you?" "They didn't hurt me physically," he answered honestly. "But they hurt your heart," she observed. The simplicity of the observation almost made him cry. "Yes, they hurt my heart." "Ours is hurt too," said Victoria, "but when we're together, it hurts less." That night, Damien couldn't sleep. Lying in his bed, staring at the ceiling, he knew he was facing the most important decision of his life. He could lose everything: the company he had built, the fortune he had accumulated, the reputation he had taken decades to establish. But when he thought about the possibility of losing Isabel and Victoria, nothing else seemed important. At 5 in the morning, he made his decision. He called his lawyer. "Robert, I need you to prepare the documents for the transfer of the company's shares, and also start the legal adoption process for 2 minors. "Mr. Cross, it's 5 in the morning. I know what time it is. I need this done today." Because Damien had realized something that Joshua hadn't considered. A man can rebuild a company, regain a fortune, restore a reputation. But the chance to be a father truly loved by 2 children who desperately needed protection, that chance comes only once in a lifetime. The morning brought a palpable tension to the house. Damien had instructed Mrs. Gable to keep the girls busy in the garden, while Dr. Miles discreetly collected the samples for the DNA test. Isabel and Victoria seemed to notice that something important was happening, but they didn't ask questions, accustomed as they were to sudden changes and adult secrets. "It's just a routine checkup," Dr. Miles explained gently, collecting cheek cells from each girl with a cotton swab, "to make sure you're both completely healthy." "Will it hurt?" asked Victoria, always apprehensive about medical procedures. "Not one bit," the doctor assured her, quickly finishing the collection. After Dr. Miles left, Damien received a call from Robert, his lawyer, with news that further complicated the situation. "Mr. Cross, there's a problem with the share transfer documents," Robert said. "Joshua cannot legally receive more than 40% of the company due to his recent criminal conviction. The law prevents people with criminal records from being majority partners in companies with government contracts. It means his proposal is technically impossible, but it also means that if he finds out, he could become even more desperate." Damien felt a chill. Desperate men were dangerous, especially when they had access to vulnerable children. That afternoon, while the girls were napping, an unexpected visit changed everything again. Carmen Reed, a social worker from the county, arrived at the door accompanied by a court officer. "Mr. Cross," she said, presenting her identification, "we've received a report about 2 minors living at your residence without proper legal documentation." Damien's heart sank. "What kind of report?" "An allegation that you are keeping orphan children without going through the legal process of temporary foster care. I need to verify the conditions in which they are living." Damien knew exactly who had made the report. Joshua was increasing the pressure, using every weapon available. "The girls are sleeping," he said, "trying to buy time." "Can you wait a few hours?" "Unfortunately, no. The report suggests a situation of risk, so we need to conduct the verification immediately." Carmen Reed was a middle-aged woman with a serious but not hostile expression. She examined the house methodically, checking the condition of the girls' room, the quality of the food, the presence of medical care. When the girls woke up and came down to the living room, Carmen interviewed them separately, a standard technique to detect possible coercion or coached responses. "How do you feel living here?" she asked Victoria. "Safe," the girl replied without hesitation. "Dad takes care of us." "Is he really your father?" Victoria seemed confused by the question. "He promised to be our dad when we saved him." "Saved him from what?" "From bad men who left him tied up in the cemetery." Carmen took careful notes. then spoke with Isabel. "Do you like living here?" "I like it," Isabel replied. "It's the first time I haven't been afraid to sleep." "Afraid of what?" "Of people yelling, of fighting noises, of being hungry." "And does Mr. Cross treat you well?" "He takes care of us like Mommy did before. She got sick." After the interviews, Carmen spoke privately with Damien. "The girls clearly feel safe and loved here," she said, "but legally your situation is irregular. They should be in a temporary shelter while the adoption is processed." "Please," Damien said, "they've already been through enough trauma. Separating them from me now would be cruel." "I understand your concern, but I have rules to follow." Carmen paused, studying him. "However, I can give you 72 hours to regularize the situation. Start the temporary adoption process, provide all the necessary documentation. And what if someone contests the adoption? Their biological father? Biological father? Carmen was on alert. Is there a father looking for them? Damien realized he had made a mistake. It's complicated. Mr. Cross, if there is a living biological father looking for these children, the situation changes completely. At that moment, as if summoned by the conversation, Joshua appeared at the living room door. He had entered the house unannounced, using a key he still had from when he lived there. "Sorry for the intrusion," he said, with a smile that fooled no one. "I'm Joshua Cross, the girl's uncle and biological father." Carmen looked from Damien to Joshua, clearly sensing the tension between the brothers. "Do you have documents to prove paternity?" "I do." Joshua pulled a folder from his pocket, containing copies of the birth certificates and other documents. "And I would like to claim custody of my daughters." Isabel and Victoria, who had come downstairs to see who had arrived, immediately hid behind Damien when they saw Joshua. Victoria began to tremble, a visceral reaction that did not go unnoticed by Carmen. "The children seem to be afraid of you, sir," the social worker observed. "It's natural," Joshua replied calmly. "They haven't seen me in a long time. Children are wary of strangers. He's not our dad," Victoria burst out, her voice filled with terror. "Our dad is him." She pointed to Damien. "She's confused," Joshua said. "It's from recent trauma." Carmen watched the interaction carefully. Her experience told her that the children's reactions were genuine, real fear, not manipulated. "Gentlemen," she said finally, "this situation requires further investigation. I will need to take the girls to a temporary shelter while we verify all the allegations." "No!" Isabel and Victoria shouted simultaneously, clinging to Damien. "Don't send us away!" cried Victoria. "Please, no!" Carmen's heart ached. She had witnessed many traumatic separations, but the agony of these two girls was especially heart-wrenching. "It's necessary," she said softly, "but it's temporary. We will resolve everything quickly." "How long?" Damien asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "A few days, a week at most." Joshua watched the whole scene with ill-disguised satisfaction. His plan was working perfectly. Damien would be forced to accept his terms or lose the girls to the system. "Can I at least say goodbye to them properly?" Damien asked. "Of course." Damien knelt before the girls, who were crying desperately. "Listen," he said, his voice firm despite the emotion. "You're going to stay somewhere else for a few days, but I will fight every day to bring you back." "You promise?" sobbed Isabel. "I promise with all my heart." "What if they don't let you come get us?" asked Victoria. "Then I'll keep trying until I do, even if it takes years." Joshua approached. "It doesn't have to be this way," he said, feigning compassion. "We can sort this out as a family." Damien glared at him with all the hatred he could muster. "We are not family. The girls are my daughters. That makes us family, whether you like it or not." When the social services car drove away with Isabel and Victoria, Damien felt as if an essential part of his soul had been ripped out. The girls looked at him through the rear window, their small faces marked by tears and terror. Joshua remained in the house after Carmen left. "Painful, isn't it?" he commented casually, "watching the people we love being taken away. What do you want?" "The same thing as yesterday. The company. In return, I sign the custody transfer papers and you can legally adopt them." "My lawyer says you can't be a majority partner because of your criminal record." Joshua laughed. "Your lawyer is right, but I can be a partner through a third party, someone clean who will manage my share." He paused. "And there's a second option." "What option?" "You give me 50% of the company and become my partner. Officially, we're equals. Unofficially, I'm in charge." Damien realized he was cornered. Joshua had planned everything carefully, using the child protection laws against him. "I need time to think." "You don't have time. The girls are in the shelter now. Every day they spend there is an additional trauma." Joshua headed for the door. "Tomorrow morning, you either sign the papers or I claim full custody, and I guarantee you'll never see them again." That night, alone in the house that suddenly seemed huge and empty, Damien made a decision that would change everything. He called the private investigator. "I need you to urgently investigate a case of child neglect from 6 years ago. The victim was Clara Santos. I want to know exactly what happened to her and her daughters when they were forced to leave Millfield. Any specific suspicions?" "I suspect Joshua Cross was responsible for a lot more than he admitted. The St. Francis shelter, where Isabel and Victoria had been taken, was an old building in downtown Millfield that temporarily housed children in family conflict situations. The yellowed walls and the smell of disinfectant couldn't disguise the sadness that permeated every hallway. Sister Constance, the 65-year-old director, received the girls with the kindness that 4 decades of social work had taught her. But even her experience hadn't prepared her for the silent agony of these 2 children who refused to be separated for a single moment. "Can they stay in the same room?" Carmen asked, watching as Isabel and Victoria clung to each other. "Of course," replied Sister Constance. "It's best to keep them together during the adjustment." But adjustment was too generous a word to describe what happened in the following days. The girls barely ate, spoke only to each other in whispers, and woke up screaming during the night. Victoria developed a constant low-grade fever the doctors attributed to extreme stress. "They're grieving," Sister Constance explained to Carmen during a follow-up visit, "as if someone has gone away forever." "It's temporary," Carmen insisted, but there was doubt in her voice. Meanwhile, Damien was living his own days of hell. The silent house tormented him with memories of the girls' laughter, their drawings still pinned to the refrigerator, the toys scattered in the empty room. Mrs. Gable tried to maintain a routine, but even she couldn't hide her tears when she passed the room that had been theirs. On the morning of the 3rd day, the private investigator called with discoveries that changed everything. "Mr. Cross, I found medical records for Clara Santos from the last years of her life. The situation is much worse than we imagined." "What did you find?" "She didn't leave Millfield voluntarily. She was brutally beaten before she left. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital in serious condition." Damien felt his blood run cold. "Beaten by whom?" "There's no official record of the attacker, but I found a retired nurse who cared for her. Clara said it was the father of her daughters, a man who threatened her with complete destruction if she didn't disappear." "Go on." "There's more. Clara worked in 3 different cities in the following years, always using false names. She was on the run, Mr. Cross. Not just hiding, fleeing for her life. And the girls. According to neighbors I managed to locate, Clara did everything to protect them. But the extreme poverty, they suffered real hunger, sir. They lived in shacks without water, without electricity. Isabel's hearing loss was the result of an untreated infection that could have been easily cured with antibiotics. Damien closed his eyes, imagining the suffering those two children had endured while he lived in his comfortable mansion. "There's something else," the investigator continued. Joshua Cross was seen in the town where Clara died. 3 different people confirmed seeing him talking to her at the hospital 2 days before she passed. He was there when she died. It seems so, and there's something strange. Clara had made an informal will, handwritten, leaving custody of the girls to anyone who shows true love for them, specifically excluding the biological father. That same day, Dr. Miles called with the results of the DNA tests. "Mr. Cross, I need to speak with you in person. It's about the girls' tests." An hour later, in the doctor's office, Dr. Miles presented results that turned Damien's world upside down. "Joshua Cross is not the father of Isabel and Victoria," he said directly. "What do you mean?" "The DNA doesn't match. There is no paternal relationship between him and the girls. But the documents, forgeries. Very well done, but forgeries." Dr. Miles showed the technical reports. Even more interesting, the girls have genetic markers that suggest an unlikely multiple paternity. What does that mean? It means the real biological father is someone Joshua knows well. Someone whose DNA is similar enough that he knew the forgery would be plausible. Damien felt as if he had been struck by an electric shock. A close relative. Exactly. A brother, father, close cousin. The realization hit Damien like an avalanche. Joshua wasn't the girl's father, but he knew who was, and he had forged documents to hide the truth. That afternoon, Damien went to the shelter, determined to see the girls. Sister Constance received him with a worried expression. "They are very shaken," she said. "Isabel has developed selective mutism. She only speaks to her sister, and Victoria is having constant panic attacks." "Can I see them?" "Please be brief. Any emotional change could worsen their condition." When Damien entered the small shared room, he found the girls sitting together on the bed, drawings scattered on the floor. But the drawings were no longer of colorful birds. They were dark scribbles, sad figures, empty houses. "Dad!" Victoria ran to hug him, followed by Isabel, who cried silently against his chest. "I came to take you home," he said, kneeling to be at their level. "When?" asked Victoria, her large eyes shining with desperate hope. "Very soon. I'm sorting out some problems with bad adults." "The man who said he was our dad?" asked Isabel, her voice hoarse from crying so much. "He is not your father. He never was." "We know," said Victoria with devastating simplicity. "A dad is someone who takes care of you, not someone who hurts you." Damien spent 2 hours with the girls, helping them draw new, colorful birds, telling stories, promising they would be home soon. When he finally had to leave, Isabel whispered something that almost made him cry. "We're not going to run away this time. We'll wait for you to come get us." "This time? We always ran away from bad places. But here we'll wait, because you always keep your promises." That night, Damien received an unexpected call. It was Carmen Reed. "Mr. Cross, I need to inform you of a complication. Joshua Cross has filed a lawsuit demanding immediate custody of the girls. He alleges that you kidnapped them and are manipulating the system." "But you saw how they react to him." "I did, but legally, if he proves paternity, he will have absolute priority." Carmen paused. "The hearing is tomorrow morning." Damien knew the moment of truth had arrived. He called Robert, his lawyer. "Robert, I need you to prepare an urgent defense for tomorrow and bring the DNA test results." "DNA? Joshua is not the girl's father. I can prove it." "That changes everything. If he forged paternity documents, it's a crime, I know." Damien looked out the window at the garden where the girls had played. But there's something more. I need to get my own DNA tested too. Yours? Why? Damien had been thinking about Dr. Miles's words about a close relative. He had been remembering the company party from 6 years ago, the night he had drunk too much after a terrible fight with his ex-wife. There were fragments of memory from that night, blurry pieces he had never been able to put together completely, because I suspect I know who their real father is. Who? Damien closed his eyes, preparing for the possibility that would change everything. Me. The next morning, as he headed to the courthouse, Damien carried with him not only the hope of getting the girls back, but also the terrifying possibility of discovering that they were truly his biological daughters, abandoned by him without his knowledge, hurt by his own ruthless business decisions, saved by a coincidence that might not have been a coincidence at all. The cruel irony of the whole situation would follow him forever. If they were indeed his daughters, they had forgiven and loved him even before knowing the truth. The Millfield courthouse was bustling on the morning of the hearing. Damien arrived accompanied by Robert, carrying a folder with the DNA test results that had been processed on an urgent basis overnight. His hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the magnitude of what he was about to discover. Joshua was already in the room, dressed in his best borrowed suit, accompanied by a public defender who clearly had no complete knowledge of the facts. Upon seeing Damien, Joshua smiled with excessive confidence. "Ready to sign the company papers?" he whispered as Damien walked past his table. "Ready to find out the truth," Damien replied without stopping. Judge Martin Taylor, an experienced 58-year-old man known for his strictness in cases involving children, opened the session by examining the documents presented by both parties. "Mr. Joshua Cross," said the judge, "you claim to be the biological father of the minors, Isabel and Victoria Santos, based on the birth certificates you have presented." "Correct, Your Honor. I am their father, and I demand my immediate custody." "And you, Mr. Damien Cross, do you contest this paternity?" Robert stood up. "We do contest it, Your Honor, and we have proof that the documents presented by the plaintiff are forged." A murmur of surprise ran through the small room. Joshua's lawyer looked genuinely shocked. It was clear that Joshua had lied to him too. "Forged?" The judge leaned forward. "That is a serious accusation. Present your evidence." Robert handed over the DNA test results. "Your Honor, tests conducted by an accredited laboratory prove that there is no paternal relationship between Joshua Cross and the minors." The judge examined the documents in silence for a few minutes that felt like an eternity. Joshua had turned visibly pale, his carefully laid plan crumbling before his eyes. "Mr. Joshua Cross," the judge finally said, his voice heavy with authority, "forgery of a public document is a serious crime. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Joshua stood up, staggering. "Your Honor, I may have been confused about the dates." "Confused?" The judge's voice rose an octave. "Birth certificates are not a matter of confusion, sir. They are legal documents that determine filiation." It was then that Robert stood up again. "Your Honor, there is something more. My client conducted his own DNA test, suspecting his own possible paternity of the minors." The silence in the room was absolute. Damien felt everyone present look at him, but his attention was entirely focused on the sealed envelope Robert was holding. "And the results?" asked the judge. Robert opened the envelope with careful hands. He read the contents silently first, his expression gradually changing from professional to genuine surprise. "Your Honor," he said, his voice slightly trembling, "the test confirms a positive paternity match between Damien Cross and the minors, Isabel and Victoria Santos." The world seemed to stop for Damien. He was really their father. The two children who had saved his life, Were his own daughters, abandoned by him without his knowledge, hurt by his business decisions, living in misery while he thrived? Joshua exploded. That's impossible. Clara was with me. I took care of her during the pregnancy. You took care of a woman pregnant with another man's child, the judge said coldly, and then you forged documents to claim the children born of that pregnancy. Your Honor, Robert intervened, we would like to request immediate custody of the minors for their biological father, Damien Cross. But the judge held up a hand. It's not that simple. Although paternity is established, we need to examine the circumstances that led to the initial abandonment of these children. Abandonment? Damien stood up. I didn't know they existed. Didn't know or didn't want to know. The judge's question was direct and painful. Damien closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember that night 6 years ago. Fragments of memory began to form. The company party, the terrible fight with his ex-wife over the phone, the excessive drinking, the conversation with Clara who had stayed late organizing files. I was going through a very difficult time, he said honestly. My marriage was ending, I was drinking. Too much, I wasn't thinking clearly. If Clara tried to tell me about the pregnancy, the judge consulted some papers. We have a record here that Clara Santos requested 3 private meetings with you in the months following the company party. All were denied by your secretary. The guilt hit Damien like an avalanche. Sandra had filtered those meetings on his orders. He had instructed her that he didn't want to be bothered with employees' personal problems. I didn't know, he murmured. If I had known... What would have changed? Asked the judge. Would you have taken responsibility or would you have tried to make Clara disappear like your brother did? I would have taken care of them, Damien's voice echoed through the room. I never would have allowed them to go through everything they went through. Joshua laughed bitterly. How can you be so sure? You fired Clara without an investigation, destroyed her life over a false accusation that I invented. You invented the accusation. The judge turned to Joshua. Yes, Joshua said, seeming to have completely lost control. Clara was blackmailing me, threatening to tell Damien about our relationship and about the real paternity of the children. So I planted the evidence and had her fired. And why didn't you want your brother to know about the paternity? Because then he would know that I was aware of the financial irregularities I was committing in the company. Clara discovered the embezzlement and blackmailed me. The pregnancy was just an additional weapon. Each of Joshua's revelations was like a stab to Damien's heart. His own daughters had suffered years of misery because of his brother's manipulations and his own emotional neglect. The judge declared a 2-hour recess. I want to speak personally with the minors before making any decision about custody. During the recess, Damien found himself alone with Robert in the courthouse hallway. Does how I feel about being their father change anything legally? He asked. It changes everything. You have a natural right to custody. But Damien... Robert paused. The judge will want to be sure you won't repeat the mistakes of the past. What mistakes? Emotional neglect, prioritizing work over family, ignoring signs that people close to you need help. When the hearing resumed, Isabel and Victoria were brought to the courthouse, accompanied by Sister Constance and a court psychologist. They were dressed in clean clothes. The shelter had provided, but their eyes still carried the deep sadness of someone who had suffered too much. The judge spoke with them gently in his private chambers, away from the adults vying for their custody. When they returned, the girls ran directly to Damien, completely ignoring Joshua. Did you tell them about the biological paternity? The judge asked Damien. No, I thought it should be up to them to want to know. Girls, the judge said softly, do you know that Damien is your biological daddy? Isabel and Victoria looked at each other with that silent communication that only twin sisters have. We always knew, Isabel said finally. How so? "We have the same eyes as him," explained Victoria. "And when he smiles, it's just like the way Mommy smiled when she talked about our real dad." "Did your mommy talk about him?" "She said our dad was a good man who had forgotten how to be happy, and that one day when we were big, maybe we could help him remember." The judge looked at Damien, who was clearly moved by the revelation. "And you want to stay with him?" "We always wanted to," said Isabel. "Ever, since we saved him." "Why did you save him that day?" Victoria answered with the devastating simplicity of childhood. "Because we knew he was our real dad, and daughters always save their dads when they need it." The judge declared the hearing closed. Joshua was arrested on the spot for forgery of documents and attempted fraud. Damien was granted immediate temporary custody of his daughters with an evaluation for final adoption in 60 days. As they left the courthouse, Isabel held Damien's hand and asked a question he would carry in his heart forever. "Dad, now that you know we're your real daughters, are you still going to love us the same?" "I'm going to love you even more," he promised, "because now I know you saved me in every way possible." The first few days after the girls returned home were a strange mix of joy and tension. Although they were officially reunited with their biological father, Isabel and Victoria carried deep traumas from their time at the shelter that manifested in unexpected ways. Victoria developed recurring nightmares where she was separated from Damien again, waking up screaming every night. Isabel, in turn, had become obsessively protective, following her father throughout the house and panicking whenever he left for work. "They need time," explained Dr. Mariana Fonseca, the new child psychologist Damien had hired. "The trauma of separation was intense. It will take months for them to feel truly safe again." Damien had made a radical decision. He sold 60% of his company shares to an honest competitor, keeping only a minority stake that guaranteed him enough income to dedicate himself completely to his daughters. The decision shocked the business world of Millfield, but he had no doubts about his priorities. "Are you sure about this?" his lawyer, Robert, had asked. "You're giving up a fortune." "A fortune is having a second chance to be a father," Damien had replied. A week after their return, something unexpected happened. Carmen Reed showed up at the house for a routine visit, but she brought information that would complicate the situation again. "Mr. Cross," she said, sitting in the living room while the girls played in the garden, "we received a disturbing call. Someone is questioning the legitimacy of the paternity." "What do you mean? The DNA tests were conclusive." "Yes, but the person who called claims to have information about irregularities in the process. They are demanding a more thorough investigation." Damien felt a familiar coldness in his stomach. "Who made this report?" They preferred not to identify themselves, but they mentioned specific details about the night the girls were conceived. Details that only someone very close could know. "Joshua is in jail." "Yes, but he had allies. And there's something else." Carmen hesitated. The person mentioned the existence of a letter left by Clara Santos. A letter that supposedly reveals important details about the girls' paternity. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Damien called the private investigator. "I need you to investigate if Clara left any personal documents when she died. Letters, diaries, anything that might contain information about the girls." "I'm already on it," the investigator replied. "In fact, I found something interesting. Clara was living with an elderly lady in the last months of her life, a Mrs. Teresa Miller, 78 years old. She told me Clara wrote several letters before she passed, but only gave her one to keep." "What did the letter say?" "Mrs. Miller hasn't opened it. She said Clara asked her to deliver it only if someone who truly loved the girls came looking for them. She's been waiting for 3 months to know if she should hand it over or not." "Where does she live?" "In Maple Creek, where Clara died, 2 hours from here. The next day, Damien did something he had never done since the girls returned home. He left them with Mrs. Gable for a few hours. The separation was traumatic. Victoria cried desperately, and Isabel went into total mutism. "It's necessary," he explained, hugging them. "I need to sort out some things about Mommy Clara so that no one else can try to separate us. You promise?" "You'll be back?" asked Victoria between sobs. "I promise I'll be back before dinner." The drive to Maple Creek was an emotional journey through his daughter's history of suffering. Damien passed through the 3 towns where Clara had lived with the girls, seeing the miserable conditions they had endured, shacks without sanitation, violent neighborhoods, the extreme poverty that had marked their childhood. Mrs. Teresa Miller lived in a simple house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a well-kept garden that contrasted with the general decay of the neighborhood. She was a woman with kind but wary eyes, who observed Damien for several minutes before inviting him in. "You've come for Clara's girls," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I have. I'm their father." "Father?" Mrs. Miller laughed bitterly. Clara spoke a lot about the girl's father. They weren't kind words. "I know. I made terrible choices back then. But now they are with me, safe, loved." "Are they really?" Mrs. Miller studied him intently. Clara said the girl's father was a man who had forgotten how to love, that he only thought about money and power. It was true, but the girls changed me. Children shouldn't have to change adults. Adults should protect children. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Mrs. Miller testing Damien, asking questions about the girls, observing his reactions. Finally, she stood up and went to get an old shoebox. Clara left these letters, 3 of them. Mrs. Miller placed the box on the table. 1 for the girls to read when they're adults, 1 for the man who married and mistreated her, and 1 for me, for the girl's father, if he ever came looking for them with true love in his heart. Damien opened the letter with trembling hands. Clara's handwriting was delicate but firm. To Isabel and Victoria's father, if you are reading this, it means our daughters are with you and that you truly love them. Yes, our daughters. They were always ours, even when you didn't know they existed. That night at the company changed my life forever, not because you got me pregnant. That was just the beginning. But because for the first time, I saw a man cry for having lost the ability to love. You were so drunk, so broken, that you forgot to be the cold businessman and became just a broken man. I tried to tell you about the pregnancy 3 times. Your secretary always said you didn't have time for employees' personal problems. On the 4th attempt, Joshua intercepted me. He said you would never accept the children, that I would be fired and slandered if I insisted. I believed him. And when he started blackmailing me, when he planted the evidence of the theft, I didn't fight back. I thought maybe it was better if you never knew about the girls. A father who didn't want daughters would be worse than an absent father. But I was wrong. And now, if you are reading this, it means you have proven me wrong. The girls have something of yours besides DNA. Isabel inherited your stubbornness. She never gives up on anything, even when she should. Victoria inherited your hidden compassion. She takes care of everyone, even when she's suffering. If you've come this far, if you've come to get this letter, if you're caring for them with love, then forgive me for having doubted. Forgive me for not fighting harder for you to know them. Take good care of them. They have already suffered for our mistakes. Don't let them suffer anymore. With love and regret, Clara. Damien finished reading with tears streaming down his face. Mrs. Miller watched him in silence. She loved him, the old lady said finally. Even after everything she suffered, she still spoke of you with affection. She said that one day you would wake up from the nightmare you were living in. She was right, Damien murmured. The girls woke me up. There's a fourth letter, said Mrs. Miller, taking a smaller envelope from the box. This one is for you to read, only if you are willing to know the full truth about what Joshua did. To our Clara. Damien hesitated. How much more horror could he discover? I need to know, he said finally. The content of the fourth letter revealed horrors he had never imagined. Joshua had not only blackmailed and manipulated Clara, he had returned to her life 3 times over the years whenever she tried to settle somewhere, always forcing her to flee again. The last time, when Clara was dying and asked for medical help, Joshua had shown up at the hospital and threatened the doctors, claiming to be her husband and having the authority to deny treatments. Clara died without receiving the care that could have saved her. When Damien arrived home, well before dinner as promised, he found the girls waiting anxiously at the door. He hugged them with a new intensity, burdened by the weight of all they had suffered and the determination to never let them be hurt again. "Dad," said Isabel, noticing something different in his expression. "Did you find out sad things about Mommy?" "I found out that she loved you more than life itself," he answered honestly, "and that she wanted you to be happy above all else." "And now we are," Victoria said simply, "because we're together." That night, Damien made one last decision about the past. He instructed Robert to add additional charges against Joshua, including involuntary manslaughter for the medical neglect that caused Clara's death. "He will pay for everything he's done," Robert said, "especially after Mrs. Miller's testimony is formalized." "It's not about revenge," Damien replied. "It's about making sure he can never hurt anyone again." But there was something he didn't know. Joshua had one last card to play, and that card would involve a revelation that would test the newly formed family in ways none of them could imagine. 2 weeks after the discovery of Clara's letters, the life of Damien and his daughters had found a delicate but increasingly stable rhythm. Isabel was making remarkable progress with her hearing therapy, able to hear whispers for the first time in years. Victoria had gone 3 consecutive nights without nightmares, an important milestone in her emotional recovery. On Tuesday morning, however, Robert called with urgency in his voice. "Damien, I need you to come to my office immediately, and come alone." "What happened?" "Joshua wants to make a deal, but there are complicated conditions." An hour later, Damien found himself in Robert's office, listening to proposals that seemed to come from a nightmare. "Joshua is willing to confess to all his crimes," Robert explained, "including the medical manipulation that led to Clara's death. In return, he wants a private conversation with you and the girls. He's crazy if he thinks I'm going to expose my daughters to him again." "Damien, listen to the whole proposal. Joshua claims to have information about other crimes related to the girls, crimes involving people who are still free and who may pose a future danger." "What crimes?" "He says Clara didn't just flee from him. There were other people involved in persecuting her, a network of people who blackmailed and threatened her." Damien's blood ran cold. "What network?" "Joshua won't give details until he has the conversation he wants. But he mentioned names of current employees at your old company, people who still have access to information about you and the girls." The possibility that his daughters were still in danger made Damien seriously consider Joshua's insane proposal. "If I accept this conversation, what guarantees do I have?" "The conversation would be at the prison with full supervision. Joshua would be handcuffed, separated by bulletproof glass. The girls wouldn't have to talk to him, just listen to what he has to say." Damien spent the rest of the day tormented by the decision. How could he expose Isabel and Victoria to the man who had destroyed their family? But how could he ignore the possibility that other predators were still on the loose? That night, during dinner, Isabel made an observation that changed his perspective. "Dad, you're worried about something," she said, studying his expression with that sharp perception she had developed. "I am," he admitted. "It's about adult things that might affect you." "Is it about the bad man who pretended to be our dad?" asked Victoria. "How do you know?" "We always know when bad things are happening," said Isabel. "We learn to notice when adults are hiding danger." Damien decided to be honest with them, within appropriate limits. "This man says he knows about other bad people who might try to hurt our family, but for him to tell us, he wants to talk to us." The girls looked at each other with that peculiar silent communication. "We want to listen," Victoria said surprisingly. "Are you sure? We've spent our whole lives being afraid of people who kept secrets," Isabel explained. "It's better to know the truth even when it hurts." "And he can't hurt us anymore," Victoria added, "because now we have you to protect us." The girls' absolute trust in him was simultaneously comforting and terrifying. They had placed all their emotional security in his hands. 3 days later, a surreal scene unfolded in the visiting room of the state penitentiary. Damien sat with Isabel and Victoria in front of a thick glass pane, on the other side of which Joshua waited in handcuffs, flanked by 2 guards. The girls observed Joshua with clinical curiosity, not fear. They had seen so much adult evil that he no longer intimidated them. "You wanted to talk," Damien said coldly. "So talk." Joshua looked different, thin, aged, with the look of someone who had lost everything. But when he looked at the girls, there was still something predatory in his expression. "My beautiful nieces," he said, his voice distorted by the intercom. "You've grown up." "We're not your nieces," Isabel said directly. "And you're not beautiful on the inside." Joshua laughed, but the sound was forced. "Always so smart. Clara raised you well." "Our mother raised us to recognize bad people," Victoria replied. "You're one of them." "Enough," Damien interrupted. "Say what you have to say or we're leaving." "All right." Joshua leaned forward. "Clara wasn't my only victim. There were other women at the company, female employees I blackmailed and manipulated, and some of them still work there." "Who?" "Sandra, your secretary. She always knew about the financial irregularities, but she kept quiet in exchange for salary increases and job security." Damien felt as if he had been punched. Sandra had worked for him for 8 years. "Go on." "She was the one who he blocked Clara's attempts to speak with you, not on your orders, on my orders. I was blackmailing her with evidence that she was stealing office supplies to resell." "And now?" "Now she's afraid I'll tell everything. Yesterday she visited me here, offering money for me to keep quiet, but she mentioned something interesting." Joshua paused dramatically, savoring having everyone's full attention. "Sandra found out where you live. She's been photographing the house, the girls playing in the garden. She's gathering information for..." Well, she wasn't specific about her plans. Damien's blood ran cold. "You're lying." "Am I?" Joshua smiled maliciously. "Check the security cameras on your street from the last few days. Look for a blonde woman driving a blue Honda Civic, license plate MLX 4521. The specificity of the details made Damien realize Joshua wasn't making it up. Why would she do that? Because Sandra knows that if I'm convicted of all the crimes, I'll implicate her too. She's trying to find a way to silence me permanently, and the girls are her leverage." Isabel, who had heard everything in silence, asked a question that surprised all the adults present. "Is the blonde lady who keeps looking at our house the same one who wouldn't let Mommy talk to Dad?" Damien and Joshua stared at her simultaneously. "You've seen Sandra watching the house?" We always see when strange people are around, explained Victoria. The blonde lady stood on the corner looking 3 times. Yesterday she took pictures of the house. And you didn't tell me. We thought you already knew, said Isabel, that it was some work thing. Damien stood up abruptly. This conversation is over. Wait, Joshua said. There's something else. Sandra isn't working alone. Who is she working with? With Roger, my ex-cellmate, Clara's brother. He wasn't arrested for the kidnapping because there wasn't enough evidence, but he blames you for his sister's death. Roger is free. He is, and very angry. Sandra convinced him that you manipulated the entire judicial system to escape responsibility for Clara's death. The situation was becoming more complex and dangerous with every revelation. What are they planning? A second kidnapping, but this time of the girls. The idea is to use them to force you to publicly confess that you killed Clara and have been buying your freedom. Damien felt the world spin. When? I don't know. Sandra said she was waiting for the right moment, when you let your guard down. And why are you telling me this? Joshua looked directly at the girls. Because regardless of everything I've done, they are innocent, and because part of me still remembers the brother you were before we became enemies. It was the first demonstration of genuine humanity Damien had seen in Joshua in years. Is there anything I can do to stop Sandra and Roger? There is, but it will require you to trust me one last time. How so? Let me help you catch them in the act. I can call. Sandra, pretend I've changed my mind about cooperating with the law. Set up a meeting where she reveals all her plans. It was an insane proposal, to trust the man who had destroyed his family to protect that same family. Why would you do this for us? Joshua looked at the girls again, and for the first time, his expression genuinely softened. Because maybe it's the only good thing I can do for the rest of my life. Damien looked at Isabel and Victoria, who had followed the entire conversation with impressive maturity. What do you think? He asked, a strange question to ask 4-year-old children, but one he knew they could answer. He's telling the truth this time, Isabel said after carefully studying Joshua's expression. And we can't always be running from bad people, Victoria added. You have to face them to end the fear. Damien made the decision that would change everything once more. All right, Joshua, we'll do it. But if you're lying, if this is some kind of trap... If I'm lying, Joshua interrupted, you'll have every right to destroy me completely. That afternoon, as they drove home, Damien knew he was about to take part in a plan that could either save or condemn his family, and that the only person he could trust to protect his daughters was the same man who had spent years trying to destroy them. The plan was meticulously crafted over 3 tense days. Joshua would call Sandra from prison, pretending to have changed his mind about cooperating with the law, and set up a meeting where she would be forced to reveal all the details of the conspiracy against Damien and the girls. The police would be monitoring the conversation, ready to act. Robert had coordinated everything with Detective Corbin, an upright man who was horrified to learn that a network of blackmail and manipulation had operated for years within one of the city's largest companies. We only have one shot, the detective warned. If Sandra suspects it's a trap, she and Roger will disappear and we'll never be able to catch them. Damien spent his days on high alert, watching every movement around the house, every person who passed on the street. The girls, sensing the tension, went back to sleeping in his room, side by side, as they had in the first days after being rescued from the shelter. Dad, you're very scared, Isabel observed on the morning of the operation. I am, he admitted, but it's not fear of dying. It's fear of not being able to protect you. We've protected ourselves our whole lives. said Victoria, her premature wisdom always surprising. "And now we have you. We'll be able to protect ourselves together." The meeting was set for 2 in the afternoon in the parking lot of an abandoned shopping mall on the outskirts of the city. Joshua had convinced Sandra that he wanted to make a deal. In exchange for a substantial sum, he would confess only to the minor crimes and implicate Damien as the mastermind behind all the irregularities. The police were positioned at strategic points with high-quality recording equipment. Damien watched everything from a surveillance van accompanied by Robert and 2 female officers specializing in witness protection. At 2 o'clock sharp, Sandra arrived, driving the blue Honda Civic the girls had described. She looked nervous, constantly looking around before entering the abandoned building where Joshua awaited her, escorted by 2 plainclothes officers. "Joshua," she said, her voice captured clearly by the hidden microphones. "Are you sure you can control this situation?" "I am," Joshua replied, playing his part perfectly, "but I need to know exactly what the plan is for the girls. I can't implicate Damien without ensuring the children won't suffer." "The children," Sandra laughed bitterly. "They are our guarantee. As long as we have them, Damien will do anything we ask." "How exactly do you plan to get them?" "Roger is going to create a diversion in front of the house tomorrow morning. A fake car accident. While everyone is paying attention to that, I'll go in through the back and take the girls. And then we keep them, safe until Damien signs the confession we've prepared, admitting he stole money from the company, that he bribed doctors to kill Clara, that he forged DNA tests. And if he refuses?" The pause that followed was icy. "He won't refuse. Not when we show him some photos of the girls in vulnerable situations." Damien's blood boiled. Sandra was planning not only to kidnap his daughters, but also to take compromising photographs of them for blackmail. "Very well," Joshua said, maintaining a professional tone. "And after he confesses, then the girls go to a distant orphanage, Damien goes to prison, and we split the money he'll be forced to give us as reparation for the years of silence." "How much money?" "2 million. Half for me, half for Roger, and a smaller part for you, of course, for your cooperation." It was at that moment that Roger appeared in the parking lot. He was a tall, thin man with scars on his face that bespoke a violent life. When he entered the building, his presence completely changed the atmosphere of the conversation. "Sandra told me you changed your mind about cooperating," he said, his voice hoarse and threatening. "I have," Joshua confirmed, "but I want guarantees that the girls won't be physically harmed." "Physically?" Roger laughed sinisterly. "We won't lay a finger on them. But psychological trauma? Well, that's been part of the package since they were born, hasn't it?" "What do you mean?" "They've spent their whole lives being abandoned, rejected, emotionally hurt. A few more days of fear won't make a difference." It was evident that Roger took sadistic pleasure in imagining his niece's suffering. "In fact," he continued, "it will be almost poetic. They saved Damien that time in the cemetery, and now they'll be the cause of his complete destruction." "There's something you don't know," said Joshua, his voice taking on a different tone. "What?" "Damien found out the truth about what I did to Clara. He has proof that I indirectly caused her death." Sandra and Roger looked at each other, clearly worried. "What proof?" "Letters that Clara wrote before she died, witnesses to how I manipulated the doctors at the hospital. If he takes this to court, then we have to act faster," Sandra decided. "Tonight? Tonight? Yes, we can't give him any more time to strengthen his legal position." It was then that Joshua revealed his true strategy. "There's a problem with that plan," he said calmly. "What problem?" "The problem is that you are despicable people planning to hurt innocent children." Joshua stood up. and I've decided I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison than be an accomplice to something like that. Sandra and Roger simultaneously realized they had fallen into a trap, but before they could react, the plainclothes officers revealed their identities and arrested them. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to kidnap, blackmail, and threatening minors," announced Detective Corbin, entering the building with reinforcements. The operation was a complete success. Sandra and Roger were found with detailed maps of Damien's house, photographs of the girls, and even a forged confession document they intended to force Damien to sign. 2 hours later, at the police station, Damien came face to face with Joshua one last time. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why did you really help me?" Joshua looked through the window of the interrogation room, thoughtful. "Because I realized something yesterday when I saw the girls at the prison. They looked at me without hatred, only with pity." He turned to Damien. "Children who have suffered as much as they have should hate me, but instead they felt sorry for me. That showed me the kind of person I had become. And now? Now I will serve my sentence. All the crimes, all the charges, and maybe, if I live long enough, one day the girls might forgive me." "They've already forgiven you," Damien said surprisingly. "Isabel told me this morning that people who do bad things aren't bad forever, that sometimes they just need to learn to be good again." Joshua closed his eyes, moved. "She said that?" "She did. And she also said that if you were in prison long enough to learn to be good, maybe one day we could visit you." 6 months later, on a sunny March morning, a moving scene unfolded at the Millfield courthouse. Damien was signing the final adoption papers for Isabel and Victoria, now officially his legal daughters, in addition to being his biological ones. The girls, wearing identical white dresses they had chosen themselves, watched the ceremony with radiant smiles. Isabel had recovered 80% of her hearing after 2 successful surgeries. Victoria hadn't had a nightmare in 3 months. "Now we're a real family on paper too," said Damien, hugging his daughters. "We were always a real family," Isabel corrected. "Family is who loves you, not who signs a paper." "But it's nice to have the paper too," Victoria added pragmatically. "That way, no one can ever try to separate us again." That afternoon, they did something that had become a monthly tradition. They visited the cemetery where it all began. But now they didn't just go to Clara's grave, they also visited the grave of the twins who hadn't survived, bringing fresh flowers and telling stories about their new life. "Thank you, Mommy," Isabel whispered to Clara's headstone, "for teaching us to recognize Daddy when we found him. And thank you for making us strong enough to save him," added Victoria. Damien knelt between the girls, looking at the grave of the woman who had suffered so much to protect them. "Thank you, Clara," he said in a low voice, "for giving me the chance to be the father I should have been from the beginning." As they walked back home, Damien reflected on the extraordinary irony of his story. He had started as a cold, self-centered businessman who fired a pregnant employee without investigation. That cruel decision had triggered years of suffering for Clara and her daughters, but in the end, it was these same daughters who had saved him, literally and figuratively. They saved him from the kidnapping. They saved him from the empty life he was leading. They saved him from becoming a bitter and lonely man. "Dad," said Isabel, interrupting his thoughts, "are you thinking sad things?" "No," he replied honestly. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst things in life can turn into the best things." "How so?" "Like how you went through so much suffering, but it made you the bravest and most loving children in the world, and how my past mistakes led me to find you." "We were going to find you anyway," said Victoria with absolute certainty. "Daughters always find their fathers, even when they're lost." 6 years later, on a May morning, Damien watched Isabel and Victoria, now 10 years old, playing in the garden of the house where they had built their family. They were normal, happy children with friends at school, healthy hobbies, and memories of trauma that had become healed scars, marks of the past that no longer hurt. Isabel had become an excellent student, specializing in art and using her unique experience to draw comic books about brave children. Victoria had developed an extraordinary talent for music, composing little songs about hope and family. Damien never remarried. His daughters were his complete family, and he had learned that paternal love was the fullest kind of love a man could experience. That afternoon, they received an unexpected visit. It was a letter from prison, the first communication from Joshua in 2 years. He had completed several rehabilitation courses, worked as a tutor for other inmates, and demonstrated a genuine transformation. "Would the girls like to visit me?" the letter asked. "Not for forgiveness, they already gave me that a long time ago, but so I can see them happy once before I complete my sentence." Damien showed the letter to the girls, leaving the decision to them. "We want to go," said Isabel after talking with Victoria. "He helped protect our family in the end, and everyone deserves to know that the children he hurt grew up happy." "Are you sure?" "Sure," confirmed Victoria, "and we want to bring drawings to show him, drawings of our happy family." The next morning, in a visiting room, lit by natural light, an unrecognizable Joshua, gray-haired with a serene face and eyes that finally reflected peace, watched his nieces with silent admiration. "You've grown so much," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We grew up happy," replied Isabel, showing him her drawings. "Look, this is our dad on adoption day, and this is our house, and this is you helping to protect us from the bad people." Joshua examined the drawings with tears in his eyes. "You drew me as a hero?" "You were a hero in the end," said Victoria simply. "People can change if they really want to." "You forgave me even after everything I did?" "We learned that holding on to anger only hurts the person holding it," explained Isabel. "It's better to forgive and be happy." When they left the prison, Damien hugged his daughters with a deep gratitude. They had become not just surviving children, but children who transformed pain into compassion, trauma into strength, abandonment into love. "Do you know you are the most extraordinary people I've ever met?" he said. "We're just kids who learned that family is who chooses to love us every day," replied Victoria, "and that real dads are the ones who stay, even when it gets hard," added Isabel. As they drove home, passing the cemetery where it all began, Damien smiled, thinking that some stories have happy endings not despite the suffering, but because of the strength that suffering can create when it is transformed by true love. His daughters had saved his life in that cold cemetery years ago, and every day since, they continued to save his soul. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.